I still remember the exact light in the kitchen that morning, the pale beams slipping through lace curtains, illuminating the grooves on the oak table I had polished for decades. 50 years in that house, and it had absorbed every moment of my life, every laugh, every meal, every tear. I thought I had grown immune to surprise within its walls. Then my son Cassian and his wife Lyra sat across from me, their hands clasped together with a confidence that seemed rehearsed, and dismantled my certainty in a single conversation. Lyra started it. She had a way of speaking that always felt like a gentle correction, the kind you offer someone you think beneath you. She looked around the kitchen, her eyes flicking over the patterned wallpaper, the mismatched china I loved, the collection of copper pots I had inherited from my grandmother. She sighed lightly as though the room were an inconvenience. "Serafina," she said, "don't you think this place feels dated? It's charming, yes, but not really functional anymore. Cassian and I have been talking, and we feel it might be time for you to move out, to find a space more suited to your stage of life." I didn't answer right away. I let her words hang in the air like dust motes. Dated, inconvenient, a polite way of saying unwelcome. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, the thrum of my own heart, my home, suddenly recast as a burden. My gaze drifted to the window ledge where the potted rosemary leaned toward the light. For half a century I had cooked with its leaves, clipped its sprigs for neighbors, crushed it in my fingers when I needed strength. That small pot seemed more loyal than the people seated before me. Cassian cleared his throat. He always followed Lyra's lead these days, though I remembered when his voice was bright with boyish insistence, when he used to beg me to bake extra loaves of bread just to share with friends. Now, in his tailored shirt and polished watch, he sounded almost official, like he was delivering a decree rather than a suggestion. "Mother," he said evenly, "it's time you found your own place. Somewhere appropriate, where you won't have to worry about maintenance or the upkeep of such a big house. It's what's best for everyone." Everyone. The word pierced me more than the suggestion itself. Who exactly was everyone? Certainly not me. Perhaps he meant for himself and Lyra, for their ambitions to reshape my home into their canvas of modernity. I felt an ache, but it was not grief. Not yet. It was the ache of clarity, the cold snap of a window opening after years of stale air. I looked at Cassian, and for a fleeting moment, I saw both the boy he had been and the man he had become. The boy with chocolate on his cheeks, the man with entitlement in his tone. I realized then that I had spent decades cushioning him from discomfort, ensuring the house always felt like his sanctuary, and in return, he believed it was his by right. Lyra leaned forward, smiling as though this were an act of kindness. "We could even help you find a lovely retirement community. They have activities, social events, people your age. It might be good for you." People my age. As if age were a box to be checked, a category to be shelved. I nearly laughed, but I kept my composure. I folded my hands in my lap, pressing my fingers together until the knuckles whitened. I would not shout. I would not plead. That was not my way. Instead, I let the silence grow until Lyra shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Finally, I spoke. My voice was calm, deliberate. "I see. Nothing more, nothing less." I rose from the table, smoothed my skirt, and walked toward the window. The herb garden outside shimmered with morning dew, each leaf catching the light like a mirror. For 50 years I had cultivated that garden, and for 50 years I had cultivated the lives inside this house. Now I was being told, with polite smiles and rehearsed phrases, that my role was finished. But something stirred inside me, something neither Cassian nor Lyra could see. It wasn't despair. It wasn't defeat. It was resolve, slow and steady, like the deep roots of the rosemary pushing down through the soil. They thought they were dismissing me to the margins of life. What they had actually done was hand me permission to reclaim it. Cassian and Lyra went on, filling the silence with plans and suggestions, but I no longer heard them clearly. I was already elsewhere, in thought, in vision, in possibility. Their words became background noise, like static on a radio. When I finally turned back, I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply smiled faintly, as though I were agreeing with their logic. Inside, however, I felt a spark ignite, subtle but undeniable. I had given half a century to this house, to this family, to their comfort. If they wanted me to find my own place, then I would. Only it wouldn't be the community Lyra so sweetly recommended. It would be somewhere entirely my own. That morning, standing in the kitchen of a house I had once thought inseparable from my identity, I understood a truth I had long avoided. The walls didn't define me. My choices did, and for the first time in decades, I was ready to make one purely for myself. Their command had not diminished me. It had freed me. When Cassian and Lyra left the kitchen that morning, still talking about contractors and paint colors, I retreated to my study. It was the one room they rarely entered, a sanctuary lined with books, framed photographs, and the heavy walnut desk my late husband, Adrian, once used to manage his business accounts. I closed the door softly behind me, pressing my back against the wood for a moment to steady myself. Silence filled the room, but it was not empty. It was purposeful, waiting. I sat at the desk and pulled out the old lockbox I kept tucked away in the bottom drawer. The brass hinges squeaked in protest, as if they too were unaccustomed to being disturbed. Inside lay the documents I had safeguarded for years. The deed to the house, tax papers, wills, and the contract Adrian and I had signed decades earlier when restructuring our estate. My fingers trembled slightly as I leafed through the papers, not from fear, but from the weight of what they represented. For years I had believed I was clinging to them out of duty. Now I saw they were keys to my freedom. I found the one page I was searching for, the clause that confirmed what my lawyer, Thorne Ellison, had explained to me after Adrian passed. Though Cassian's name had been added to the title for tax purposes, I held a recorded life estate, complete with the explicit right to sell the property during my lifetime. In plainer terms, the house was still mine. Mine to occupy, mine to maintain, and yes, mine to dispose of. Cassian might parade about thinking it was his inheritance already secured, but the law still placed authority in my hands. I traced the line with my finger, letting the words steady me. For so long, I had accepted diminished authority, accepted that my role was to support, to step aside, to let Cassian and Lyra's desires dominate the conversation. But here, in black and white, was the quiet truth. I was not powerless. I was not a guest in my own home. The decision and the future belonged to me. I replaced the documents carefully, locking the box and sliding it back into the drawer. Then I opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dim study, and for a moment I simply stared at the cursor blinking in the search bar. I could almost hear Lyra's voice in my head. A lovely retirement community. My hands hovered over the keys. The phrase formed in my mind, senior communities near me, but I could not bring myself to type it. My chest tightened at the thought of fluorescent-lit activity rooms and cheerful brochures promising companionship for your golden years. That was not living. That was waiting. Instead, I typed something else. Slowly, deliberately, as though inscribing a spell. Living in Monaco for retirees. The search results filled the screen. Photos of sunlit terraces, azure waters lapping against the harbor, elegant apartments with wrought iron balconies overlooking the Mediterranean. Articles about expat life, forums where retirees described mornings spent at outdoor cafes, afternoons walking the coastal path, evenings with friends in candlelit bistros. A headline caught my eye. Why Monaco is the ideal retirement haven for the independent-minded. I clicked, and as I read, a new vision took shape. It was not about luxury, though the grandeur shimmered in every photo. It was about freedom, a place where no one would dictate whether my wallpaper was dated, whether my copper pots belonged. A place where I could wake up and decide how to fill my hours without being made to feel inconvenient. For the first time in a long time, I let myself imagine what it would be like to choose purely for myself. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes. I could almost smell the salt air, hear the gulls, feel the warmth of a Riviera sun on my skin. It felt reckless and yet perfectly sane. After all, hadn't Adrian once told me, half joking as we watched a travel documentary, that if life ever became too small, we should simply buy a one-way ticket to the Mediterranean? At the time I had laughed, thinking it fanciful. Now, it felt prophetic. I opened a notebook and began jotting numbers: estimated home value, portfolio balances, projected income streams. The discipline of years of careful living had left me with more than enough. Thorne had always assured me of that. My pen scratched across the page with growing confidence. For so long I had been waiting for someone else to give me permission. But that morning, Cassian and Lyra, in their unthinking arrogance, had given it to me in the cruelest way possible. I snapped the notebook shut, a small smile tugging at my lips. The plan would begin in silence. No dramatic announcements, no shouting matches, just quiet preparations, measured steps, and then when the moment came, a departure so clean they would never see it coming. I rose from the desk and walked to the window. Outside, the garden shimmered with dew, the roses bending gently under the weight of blossoms. 50 years in this house, 50 years of loyalty, memory, and sacrifice. But loyalty was not ownership, and memory was not obligation. My life did not end in this place. It would continue elsewhere, in color and light. I whispered the word to myself, tasting it like a promise. Monaco. In that whisper, I was no longer the woman told to leave. I was the woman deciding where she would arrive. The morning after my quiet decision, I dialed Octavia de Laurent. Her name alone carried weight in our town. She was the sort of realtor who never needed to advertise. Her reputation was her calling card. Octavia answered on the second ring, her voice smooth and efficient. "Madame Meyercourt," she said. "I wondered when you might call me. That caught me off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have." Octavia had an uncanny instinct for timing, for sensing when a long-held house might soon loosen its grip on its owner. I told her I wanted a market analysis straightforward, factual, without embellishment. She promised she would come by the next afternoon. "You may be surprised by the numbers," she added before hanging up. I sat for a moment with the receiver in my hand, the silence of the study settling around me once more. Numbers, I thought. The language that stripped away sentiment and forced clarity. When Octavia arrived, she swept through the rooms with her tablet, taking notes, snapping discreet photographs, speaking in clipped observations. Original hardwood floors, excellent condition. Mature garden adds significant value. Kitchen dated but charming. Neighborhood highly desirable. I followed her silently, watching her eyes as she assessed the home that had been my stage for 50 years. For me, it was a treasury of memories. For her, it was square footage, curb appeal, market demand. I didn't resent her view. In fact, I found it oddly liberating. She saw the house as an asset, not a shrine. Later, she sat at my kitchen table, my table, not Lyra's new glossy fantasy, and slid her tablet across to me. Based on comparable sales and the condition of the property, I would list it between 1.9 and 2.1 million. Cash buyers are common in this bracket. With the right strategy, you could close within weeks. Her eyes met mine, sharp but respectful. "You'll have options." 2 million. I let the figure settle into me like a stone dropped in a well, rippling outward. For years, I had thought of this house as a tether, something that bound me to responsibilities and routines. Now, thanks to Octavia's calm precision, I began to see it as a key. A door could be unlocked. That evening, I called Thorne Ellison, my financial advisor. Thorne had the kind of voice that made even the direst numbers sound manageable. He answered on speakerphone while I spread papers across my desk. The lockbox once again opened beside me. I explained Octavia's valuation. He chuckled softly. "I always said your property was your hidden jewel, Serafina. But remember, it isn't just the house. You have liquidity, you have a balanced portfolio, and you have income streams that would follow you anywhere. You could sustain a life abroad without stress." He reviewed my accounts aloud. Dividends, pension, modest but steady royalties from Adrian's old business. I scribbled notes as he spoke, the numbers forming a pattern on the page. Safe, stable, sustainable. In fact, Thorne concluded, your current lifestyle is far below what your assets can support. You've been living cautiously, perhaps too cautiously. And cautious. The word stung, because it was true. For decades, I had thought restraint was virtue. Now I saw it had been a kind of self-imposed exile. I had believed that waiting, sacrificing, and shrinking myself was noble. But what had it earned me? A son who thought he could dismiss me from my own home, a daughter-in-law who saw my life's work as clutter. Restraint had not protected me. It had only silenced me. I stacked the papers neatly, aligning their edges with care. "Thorne," I said quietly, "do you think I could truly live comfortably in Monaco?" He paused, perhaps surprised by the directness of the question, then answered without hesitation. "Yes, Serafina, you could and you should. You've earned more than comfort. You've earned choice." After we ended the call, I spent hours at the desk, building columns of figures, circling totals, cross-checking expenses against potential rents I had seen online. It was methodical work, the sort of task that once would have bored me, but tonight it was exhilarating. Each line of ink was not an obligation but a possibility. In my mind's eye, I saw a montage of what the next weeks might look like. Octavia's yard sign planted firmly in the lawn, photographers capturing the facade in the golden hour, spreadsheets on Thorne's desk with neat rows of projected returns, potential buyers drifting through the halls with appreciative murmurs, and beyond that, my own hands pushing open the shutters of an apartment balcony in Monaco, the sea stretched out like a promise. I caught my reflection in the study window, the night outside turning it into a mirror. My face was older, lined with time, but there was a new light in my eyes. I touched the glass lightly, almost as though greeting a stranger. "I can actually do this," I whispered. It wasn't bravado. It was clarity. For the first time in years, the numbers, the documents, the advice all pointed to freedom. I didn't need Cassian's approval. I didn't need Lyra's condescension disguised as concern. I had the means, I had the will, and now I had the plan. The house was no longer a burden. It was a gift waiting to be transformed. I turned off the lamp and left the study. The lockbox returned to its drawer, the figures still etched in my mind. Upstairs, I lay awake long into the night, not with worry but with anticipation. The walls that had heard my quiet endurance for 5 decades now bore witness to something else entirely, the quiet beginning of my escape. 2 days after Octavia had left me with her valuation report, and Thorne had confirmed my financial footing, I lingered in the hallway late at night, drawn by the hum of voices drifting from the living room. Cassian and Lyra were seated together on the sofa. A glossy design magazine spread open between them, pages marked with sticky notes. They didn't notice me standing in the shadows near the staircase, and perhaps it was better that way. What I heard was not meant for my ears, but it revealed everything I needed to know. Lyra tapped her manicured finger on a page showing a minimalist white and chrome kitchen. "This would look perfect once we gut her old cabinets. We can open up the wall, make it all one big entertaining space. Can you imagine? Our friends will finally see the house's potential." Cassian nodded eagerly. "And upstairs, we'll take the 2 smaller rooms and knock them into one. It'll be our new master suite, with a walk-in closet for you, Lyra. You deserve it." His tone was indulgent, a man eager to please, as though the house were already theirs to refashion at will. The words hit me harder than I expected. Our new master suite, gut her cabinets. They weren't even pretending anymore that this was my home. In their minds, I was already gone, erased from the blueprint of the future they were sketching together. I leaned against the wall, my breath shallow. For a moment, pain flared. 50 years of memories reduced to dated decor, my kitchen dismissed as something to demolish. But then, underneath the ache, a sharper feeling rose. Certainty. This was no longer about insult. It was about truth. They believed the house was theirs, and because of that belief, they had already forfeited their claim to my heart. Lyra rubbed her ring absently as she spoke, a small, almost nervous gesture that caught my eye. Perhaps some part of her sensed the cruelty of what she was saying, or feared the audacity of claiming a home not yet rightfully hers. For one fleeting second, she looked almost human to me, not just the sleek, controlling woman I had come to know, but someone unsure. But then she snapped. The magazine closed and said brightly, "By summer, it will finally feel like ours." Whatever softness had stirred vanished. I withdrew quietly before they could see me, retreating to my study with my pulse steady and my resolve hardening. Sitting at my desk, I opened my laptop once more, my fingers moving without hesitation. I typed the name I had circled in my notes. Elodie Rousseau, Monaco real estate agent. Her website glowed across my screen, sleek and welcoming. I clicked contact and filled in my details. Within an hour, despite the time difference, my phone buzzed with a message. Elodie's words were efficient yet warm. Bonjour, Madame Miracourt. I would be delighted to show you some properties in Monaco. Are you available for a virtual tour tomorrow? Tomorrow. The swiftness of it made my heart leap. I replied immediately, yes. Please arrange at your convenience. The next afternoon, I sat with my computer angled just so, the curtains drawn to soften the light. Elodie appeared on the screen, a graceful woman with chestnut hair swept into a low bun. Behind her stretched the balcony of an apartment with turquoise water glittering beyond. Bienvenue à Monaco, she said with a smile. Shall we begin? She guided me through 3 properties, one with Belle Epoque windows opening onto the harbor, another with a rooftop terrace spilling with bougainvillea, and a third with marble floors that gleamed under the Mediterranean sun. As she moved her camera, I could almost feel the warmth radiating through the screen. Each space whispered possibility, a life unburdened, a chapter entirely my own. When the tour ended, Elodie leaned close to the camera. Apartments like these do not stay long. If you wish to secure one, I recommend placing a holding deposit. Fully refundable, of course, but it ensures no one else takes it while you decide. I thanked her politely and ended the call. Then I sat for a long moment, staring at the screensaver swirling across my laptop. The weight of 50 years pressed against me. Birthdays in that kitchen, anniversaries on that staircase, Adrian's laughter echoing through the hall. Yet none of those memories were protected by Cassian's entitlement or Lyra's disdain. The only way to honor my past was to secure my future. I opened my banking app. My fingers hovered, then moved with calm precision. Within minutes, the wire transfer was complete. A holding deposit, sent across the sea, tying me to a place I had not yet set foot in but already felt drawn toward. When the confirmation email arrived, I whispered aloud, "It's mine. Not the apartment, not yet, but the choice, the power to leave, the right to claim a life beyond these walls." That night, as I passed the living room again, Cassian and Lyra were still deep in conversation about renovations. They had no idea that their imagined future was already slipping through their fingers. They spoke of our house, while I, in silence, had chosen something far greater. In that moment, the balance of power shifted. They just didn't know it yet. Octavia moved with remarkable speed. Within 3 days of her photographer capturing the house in the golden light of late afternoon, we had multiple offers. She called me one morning, her voice clipped but excited. "Serafina, it seems the market has been waiting for a property like yours. We already have 4 strong bids, and 2 of them are cash." I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Cassian and Lyra had once delivered their little decree, and stared at the printouts Octavia had couriered over. Numbers danced before my eyes. 1.9 million, 2 million, even one at 2.05. But what caught me wasn't the digits. It was the letter attached to one offer in particular. Alaric and Giselle Fenwick. Their handwriting was elegant, their words heartfelt. They had walked through the house during a showing and noticed my garden. Giselle had written, "Your roses reminded me of my grandmother's. We could feel the love in every corner of this home. We promise, if you choose us, we will honor what you built here." I read it 3 times, my throat tightening. These strangers, these would-be buyers, saw the house not just as a structure but as a vessel of care, memory, and roots. Cassian had walked through those same gardens countless times and never thought to thank me for tending them. Lyra had dismissed the space as overgrown clutter. Yet here were 2 people who wanted to nurture what I had cherished for half a century. Octavia's email summary was pragmatic. Fenwick's offer 2M cash, no contingencies, close in 2 weeks. The strongest deal on paper and, in my heart, the only deal that made sense. I called Octavia. "Accept the Fenwick's offer," I said quietly. She paused only a beat before replying, "Wise choice. They will close swiftly." The next days passed in a blur of signatures and scheduling. Inspectors arrived, moving briskly through the rooms. Appraisers measured, nodded, scribbled notes. Each step felt strangely detached, as though I were watching my life dissolve into documents. Yet underneath the surreal pace, a steady current of resolve carried me forward. This was no longer my prison. It was my passport. Still, one evening I lingered in the garden, pruning the roses one last time. The air was cool, the petals soft under my fingers. I thought of Cassian as a boy, running barefoot on this lawn, laughing until his cheeks turned pink. I had believed those memories bound us tightly, that they guaranteed a lifelong affection. But in truth, his love had come with conditions so long as I bent, so long as I yielded, so long as I did not inconvenience. It was a hard truth, and it cut deep, yet facing it freed me from the illusion that sacrifice would ever be enough. The night before closing, Cassian knocked on my study door. He looked agitated. "Mother," he began, "I just heard from a neighbor that you're selling the house. Tell me it isn't true." His voice carried disbelief, almost outrage, as though I had stolen something that rightfully belonged to him. "It is true," I said calmly. "The paperwork will be signed tomorrow." "But you can't just—" He stopped himself, anger darkening his face. Then, softer, "I thought this house would be mine one day." I met his gaze steadily. "It was never yours to claim, Cassian. Not yet. And now, not ever. I made my choice." He left without another word, the sound of the door slamming echoing through the halls. I sat in silence afterward, mourning not the house, but the realization that my son valued me only insofar as I gave him what he wanted. The affection I had once believed unconditional had been weighed and measured, and it had come up short. The following afternoon, I met Octavia at her office. The closing documents lay stacked neatly on her polished desk. She handed me the pen, its gold nib gleaming under the light. I hesitated for only a moment, then pressed it to the paper. With each signature my name written in flowing strokes, I felt the chains of the past loosen. Adrian's widow, Cassian's mother, the keeper of the family home, those roles dissolved with every line of ink. What remained was simply me, Serafina Miracourt, woman choosing her own life. When the final page was signed, Octavia extended her hand. "Congratulations," she said. "In 2 weeks, the funds will clear. You're free." Free. The word pulsed through me, rich and undeniable. As I stepped out into the late afternoon, the sun seemed brighter, the air sharper. I clutched the pen Octavia had allowed me to keep, its weight in my palm both ordinary and monumental. A simple tool, yet for me, it was liberation incarnate. Walking back to the house that would soon no longer be mine, I did not feel sorrow. I felt light. Cassian and Lyra could cling to their illusions of ownership, but the truth was written in black ink across those contracts. I had chosen. I had acted. I had secured my escape. The house would belong to Alaric and Wysel Fenwick, caretakers who saw its soul. And at last I belonged only to myself. The morning of my departure arrived quietly, the air cool and crisp, the house unnaturally still. I woke before dawn, not out of restlessness, but because I wanted to mark the day with intention. After 50 years under this roof, I owed the house at least a proper farewell. I made coffee one last time in the familiar kitchen, the percolator bubbling softly, filling the air with a scent that had once meant comfort, now tinged with finality. As the sun rose, its light spilling across the floorboards, I sat at the table with a fountain pen and 2 sheets of stationery, each headed with my name. I began the first letter, addressed to Cassian. My words were deliberate, pared down to truth without cruelty. "My son, by the time you read this, the house will no longer be ours. The sale has closed, and I have moved on. The proceeds will not pass through your hands, because they were never yours to claim. I hold a recorded life estate, complete with the right to sell. It was always mine to dispose of, and I have chosen to do so. I leave you no bitterness, only the hope that you will learn to value what is given freely, rather than assume it is owed. You will need to stand on your own now, as every adult must." I folded it neatly, placed it in an envelope, and wrote his name on the front. The second letter was for Lyra. My tone was courteous, though distant. Lyra, I respect that you married my son and sought to make a life with him. But this house, with its dated decor and copper pots, was never yours to claim, nor to renovate. It has now passed to new owners who love it as it is. I hope, sincerely, that you will find a home where you may shape the walls to your own liking, without erasing the past of another. My wish for you is perspective, for without it, no home will ever satisfy. That one, too, I folded and sealed. I placed both letters on the kitchen counter, side by side, where I knew their eyes would fall the moment they entered. I carried my suitcase down the staircase slowly, deliberately, feeling the echo of Adrian's footsteps, of Cassian as a child sliding down the banister, of my own pacing late at night when fevers or fears had kept me awake. Every creak of the wood seemed to acknowledge my leaving. At the bottom, I paused, setting the suitcase beside the door. I looked around once more, memorizing the light, the angles, the scent of rosemary still drifting in from the garden. Then, I turned the knob and opened the door. But Cassian appeared before I could step out. His face was pale, his expression stricken. He must have heard from Octavia, or perhaps from a neighbor who had seen the for sale sign vanish overnight. "Mother," he said, voice rising, "what have you done?" "I've written it down for you," I replied evenly, gesturing toward the letters. He brushed past me, snatched up the one with his name, and tore it open. His eyes scanned the page, disbelief flashing across his face, then outrage. "You sold it? But it was in my name." I met his gaze without flinching. "And lawfully still mine to sell," I said calmly. "You knew this, though perhaps you forgot. The deed transfer was for taxes, but my life estate was recorded. The law never took this house from me. You simply assumed it was already yours." His hands shook, the paper rattling in his grip. "How could you do this without telling me?" "I told you, Cassian," I said, my voice steady. "You told me to find my own place. So I did." For a moment, he looked like a boy again, lost, angry, unable to comprehend a world where his desires did not dictate reality. Lyra appeared in the doorway then, her hair unkempt, her eyes wide. She picked up her letter, skimmed it, and pressed her lips together, a mixture of fury and embarrassment clouding her face. "Where will you go?" Cassian demanded. "To my own place," I answered. "One you will never be able to call yours." Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Then, outside, a horn sounded the taxi I had ordered waiting at the curb. Its note cut through the tension like a clear command. "Time to go." I reached for my suitcase, lifting it with both hands. Cassian made a half-step forward, as though to stop me, then faltered. Lyra looked down at the letter in her hand, her jaw tight. Neither spoke again. I opened the door fully, letting the cool air wash over me. The taxi driver stepped out, ready to load my bag. I turned back one last time, not to apologize, not to explain further, but simply to take a final imprint of the house. Then I walked out, pulling the door shut behind me. The sound of the latch clicking into place felt like the closing of a chapter I had been writing for 5 decades. The letters on the counter would say the rest. My future was waiting at the curb, engine running, horn already quiet. With each step I took toward that car, the weight of the past lightened, and my resolve sharpened. They had told me to find my own place, and now I had. The taxi ride to the airport felt both endless and fleeting. I sat in the back seat, hands folded on my lap, watching the familiar streets blur past the window. Every tree, every corner shop, every stretch of pavement was tied to half a century of memory, yet none of it reached out to hold me back. The house was no longer mine, the papers signed, the letters left behind. I carried only one suitcase, a passport, and a future that shimmered just beyond the horizon. At the terminal, the driver helped me with my bag and tipped his cap. I walked forward with a calm steadiness that surprised even me. Inside, the air buzzed with the low roar of announcements and rolling suitcases. I approached the airline desk, handed over my ticket, and without hesitation asked about an upgrade. The attendant smiled, typed quickly, and looked up. "We can offer you first class for a modest fee." I nodded, sliding my card across the counter. If I was stepping into a new life, it would begin with dignity. The lounge was quiet, cocooned from the chaos beyond. I sat near the window, watching planes glide across the tarmac. When boarding was called, I moved through the jet bridge and settled into a wide leather seat. A flight attendant placed a glass of champagne in front of me before takeoff. I held it up to the light, bubbles rising in a slow cascade, and thought of the countless mornings Cassian and Lyra had taken my coffee for granted, the afternoons I had scrubbed kitchens and weeded gardens while they planned their renovations. This was different. This was for me alone. As the engines roared and the plane lifted into the sky, I pressed my hand lightly against the window. The city below grew small, then vanished beneath a veil of clouds. A sharp white contrail from another aircraft sliced across the blue above us, a luminous scar in the heavens. I watched it fade, a perfect metaphor. The line left behind as proof of movement, direction, change. My own contrail was invisible, but it was there, a new trajectory, etched across the fabric of my life. Hours passed in a strange rhythm of quiet meals, soft pillows, and the murmured hum of engines. I thought about Adrian, about how he once joked that if life ever became too narrow, we should buy a one-way ticket to the Mediterranean. His absence was still a hollow ache, but for the first time, I felt as though I was fulfilling a promise we had left unspoken. I sipped the last of the champagne and closed my eyes, letting the image of Monaco form behind my lids. The sea glittering, the balconies of old buildings draped in flowers, the smell of salt carried on the wind. When the pilot announced our descent, I straightened in my seat, heart quickening. The plane dipped through clouds, and there it was, the Côte d'Azur, a dazzling swath of turquoise stitched with white sails. I gasped softly, unable to stop myself. The Mediterranean stretched endlessly, sun dancing on its surface as though welcoming me home. We landed smoothly at Nice Côte d'Azur Airport. The terminal was bright, modern, and filled with the melodic cadence of French and Italian voices. I collected my bag and walked toward arrivals, where a driver held a placard with my name, Madame Miracourt. I smiled, savoring the sound of it. He took my suitcase with a bow and led me to a sleek black car waiting just beyond the sliding doors. The drive along Capdale was like slipping into a dream. The road curved along the cliffs, the sea crashing below in a rhythm older than history. Villas dotted the hillsides, their shutters painted in soft pastels, their terraces heavy with bougainvillea. I rolled down the window slightly, breathing in the salt air, the perfume of pine, the faint sweetness of jasmine carried on the wind. My heart beat faster with every turn, every glimpse of the coastline unfurling like a ribbon. At last, the car slowed before an ornate facade. The building rose in creamy stone, wrought iron balconies curling like lace, windows reflecting the afternoon sun. It was unmistakably Belle Époque, elegant yet welcoming, a structure that had stood for over a century and would stand for many more. The driver stepped out and opened the door for me. My shoes touched the pavement, and I looked up at the grand arched doorway as the bell of a nearby church tolled the hour. When the heavy doors opened, light poured through the lobby, gilded mirrors casting reflections across marble floors. Beyond, through the glass of tall French doors, I saw the horizon, the Monaco harbor glittering, yachts bobbing like pearls strung across the sea, and the endless expanse of the Mediterranean glowing in gold and blue. I drew in a sharp breath. This was it. This was the place I had chosen. Not because it was offered, not because it was convenient for anyone else, but because it was mine. After 50 years of living within boundaries drawn by others, I had stepped through into a horizon with no limits. I stood there for a long moment, my suitcase beside me, my past behind me, and my future spread out before me like the sea itself. The first morning in Monaco felt like waking into someone else's life. Only I knew, with a quiet certainty, that it was finally mine. I rose early, the sea already glinting silver beneath the rising sun, and padded across the tiled floor to the terrace. The small table there was just wide enough for a porcelain cup and saucer, a plate with a croissant still warm from the boulangerie downstairs, and the folded newspaper whose headlines I only half understood. I sipped my espresso slowly, the bitter richness mingling with the salt breeze, and watched the harbor below awaken. Fishing boats returned with their early catch, gulls wheeled overhead, and the first sleek yachts stirred to life. After decades of making coffee for others, serving breakfasts and clearing dishes, this ritual was mine alone, unhurried and unobserved. Later, I set out on foot, determined to know the city not from a car window but with the intimacy of walking its streets. Rue Grimaldi drew me first, its narrow lanes alive with vendors setting up their stalls. Bright umbrellas unfurled, crates of citrus gleamed like small suns, and the air was rich with the mingled aromas of herbs, cheese, and bread. I paused at a stall laden with olives, their glossy skins glinting like jewels. The vendor, a man with a kind smile, greeted me in French. My tongue stumbled over the reply, but I tried. He corrected me gently, and when I repeated the phrase, he nodded approvingly. Each day, I practiced more, learning the rhythm of a language that once had felt distant, but now was a key to belonging. My accent was clumsy, my vocabulary small, but each word I gained was a step toward freedom. No one here looked at me as though my age made me less capable. Strangers smiled when I tried, applauded my effort, encouraged me to continue. I walked home with a basket heavy with fruit, baguette, and flowers, feeling a lightness I had not known in years. It was through one of these market afternoons that I received an invitation from a neighbor in my building. "You must come to the salon at Dr. Karen's," she said, pressing a handwritten card into my hand. "It is where the heart of Monaco truly beats." Curiosity and courage nudged me, so I went. The salon was held in an elegant apartment filled with books, the air fragrant with wax and paper. Elderly men and women sat in chairs arranged in a circle, younger writers and scholars leaning against doorframes, the hum of French and Italian weaving together like music. At the center sat Dr. Aureline Karen, a retired historian with silver hair, pulled back in a knot, and eyes that seemed to pierce right through pretense. She spoke about history, about resilience, about the way individuals could rewrite their stories at any age. At one point, she turned to me, a stranger in their midst, and said with deliberate clarity, "Courage is the currency of age. When we are young, we spend energy, beauty, charm, but in later years, all that is asked of us is courage. Spend it freely." The room fell into thoughtful silence, then applause. I sat still, her words reverberating through me. Courage, the very thing I had thought I lacked all those years of yielding, of staying silent, of allowing Cassian and Lyra to script my role. Yet here I was, proof that courage had quietly accumulated in me like interest in a long-forgotten account, waiting to be drawn upon. That evening, returning home, I found an envelope in my mailbox. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but when I opened it, a photograph slipped out. It was from Alaric and Wysel Fenwick, the new owners of my old home. The image showed my garden in full bloom, the roses thick with blossoms, dew glistening on their petals. Beneath it, Ysel had written, "Your roses are thriving. We thought you'd want to know." I pressed the photograph to my chest, and to my own surprise, tears spilled down my cheeks. I had feared that in leaving, I had abandoned not only the house but the living things that had tethered me to it. To see the garden tended, cherished, still alive, it was as though a weight I hadn't realized I carried dissolved. I cried not out of grief, but out of relief. My past was being honored by hands that understood, leaving me free to honor my present. That night, I pinned the photograph to the corkboard above my desk, where the sea breeze could brush against it through the open window. I lit a small candle, poured a glass of wine, and whispered to myself, "The roses live, and so do I." With each sunrise on the terrace, each stumble through new French phrases, each conversation in Dr. Karen's salon, I felt myself unfurling. No longer just Serafina, the caretaker, the widow, the dismissed mother. I was Serafina Meyercourt, a woman learning, tasting, beginning again. And for the first time in decades, I understood what it meant to belong to myself, to the world, to the possibility of joy. The call came late on a Wednesday evening. I had just returned from a lecture at Dr. Karen's salon. my head still full of poetry and the smell of jasmine from the street below. I set my basket down, intending to pour a glass of wine, when the phone buzzed. The number was familiar, though my stomach tightened before I answered. "Mother," Cassian said. His voice carried none of its usual confidence. It was raw, ragged, like a boy caught in the rain. "She's gone." I sat down at the small writing desk by the window. "Lyra?" "Yes. She left last week. Took her things. Said she couldn't do this anymore. The debts? The house, well, not the house, since you sold it, but the plans. Everything collapsed. And now," he trailed off, the silence thick. "And now?" I asked evenly. "I'm in a flat," he said finally. "One room. Cramped. No garden, no space. I can't breathe here. Mother, I thought things would be different. I thought," his voice cracked, "and for a moment, I heard the boy he once was. I thought you would help me." The old reflex rose in me to rush in, to cushion, to rescue. For decades, that had been my role. To patch, to fix, to make smooth the sharp edges of his mistakes. But I sat still, watching the lights of the harbor flicker beyond my terrace doors, and let the reflex pass. "Cassian," I said quietly, "I need you to listen. I am not your net." There was silence on the other end, then confusion. "What do you mean?" "All your life, you have expected me to catch you when you fall, to shield you from consequences, to absorb the cost. But I cannot, and I will not. Not anymore. I am not your net. I am your mother if you wish to respect me in that role, but I will not be the scaffolding that props up your irresponsibility." He exhaled sharply, frustration lacing his words. "So you're just leaving me like this? Alone? After everything?" "After everything," I repeated, but not unkindly. "Do you remember when you told me to find my own place? You thought you were dismissing me. In truth, you freed me. Now I am telling you the same. Find your own place. Stand on your own. Learn what it is to carry the weight of your own choices." For a long time, all I heard was his breathing. I could picture him, pacing in that cramped flat, surrounded by the ghosts of ambitions that had crumbled. At last, his voice came low, almost defeated. "I don't know how." "That is the beginning of wisdom," I replied. "Admitting you don't know is the first step to learning. You have always wanted to leap without looking, trusting someone else to hold the net. Now you must look, measure, and build. It will not be easy, but it will be yours." He muttered, "You sound like Dr. Karen," and I almost smiled, though he couldn't see. "No," I said. "I sound like your mother, the one who has always wanted you to grow into your own man." He was quiet again, then whispered, "And if I fail?" "Then you will fail honestly," I said, "and you will rise honestly, but you will not fail because I enabled you. That cycle is over." On the line, I heard the faint catch of a sob he tried to swallow. My heart ached, but I did not bend. This was love, too, holding the boundary, refusing to let him drag me back into the role of savior. For the first time, I was offering him something stronger than rescue, the chance to face his life as his own. When the call ended, I sat for a long while, looking out at the sea. The harbor lights glimmered like scattered coins across the water. I thought of Cassian, small in his flat, stripped of Lyra's influence, burdened by debts he had once thought beneath his notice. It hurt to picture him suffering, but I knew this pain was necessary. Without it, he would never learn. I poured my wine at last and lifted the glass to my lips. Courage, Dr. Karen had said, was the currency of age. Tonight I understood it more deeply. Courage was not only crossing oceans or signing deeds. Sometimes it was holding the line with those you loved most, even when their cries pulled at your heart. I whispered into the quiet room, "I am not your net, Cassian. I am your mother. And that is enough." The sea answered in its steady rhythm against the rocks, a reminder that boundaries, like tides, are natural, firm, and unyielding, and in their steadiness lies love. The second call from Cassian came weeks later, though this time the tone was different. I was seated on the terrace, a sketchpad balanced on my knees, the sea stretching endless and blue before me. I had begun sketching the coastline during my morning walks, not because I was any good, but because I enjoyed the act of noticing. My phone buzzed against the iron table, and when I saw his name, I exhaled slowly before answering. "Mother," he said, his voice quieter, more measured. "I've been going to therapy." For a moment I said nothing, simply letting the words settle. "I'm glad to hear that," I replied. "What have you learned?" He gave a small, rueful laugh. "That I've been entitled. That I expected everything to be handed to me because you always shielded me from the world. And Lyra, well, I let her wants become my compass instead of finding my own. When she left, I thought I was the victim, but I see now that I was the architect of my own downfall." I felt my throat tighten, though I kept my voice steady. "It takes courage to say that, Cassian. More courage than you've shown in years." "I'm trying," he said. "I know I hurt you. I know I made you feel disposable in the very home you built for us. I can't take that back, but I want to do better." His voice faltered. "I don't want to lose you, Mother." I closed my sketchpad, resting my hand on its cover. "You don't have to lose me, Cassian. But if we are to continue, it must be on new terms. Respect or nothing. I won't be erased. I won't be managed. And I won't be treated as a burden." "I understand," he said quickly. "I do." Then, after a pause, "Will you tell me about your life now? What you're doing there?" I smiled faintly, glancing toward the harbor where children laughed as they chased pigeons along the promenade. "I've joined a cooking class," I told him. "Bouillabaisse. The teacher insists I must master the broth before I can add the fish. I walk the coastline each morning, and sometimes in the evening I sit in Dr. Karen's salon, listening to poets recite until the candles burn low. And I have friends here, people who know me not as your mother, or Adrian's widow, but simply as Serafina. It is liberating." He let out a slow breath, as if picturing it. "It sounds beautiful. I'd like to see it someday. If you'll let me." I considered his words carefully. Once, I would have seized the offer, desperate to maintain closeness. Now, I knew better. "You may visit," I said at last, "but only with respect. I will not host complaints about the decor or comparisons to what you lost. You will sit with me, as an adult, as my son, not as someone entitled to my life. If you can do that, you are welcome." "I can," he said firmly, almost urgently. "I want to." "Then come," I replied, "and we will share coffee on the terrace." When the call ended, I lingered on the terrace, imagining what that meeting might look like. Not a tearful reconciliation, not a return to the old imbalance, but something new. 2 cups of coffee, placed side by side on the table, the same horizon stretching before us. No hierarchy, no obligations pressed down upon me. Simply 2 people, mother and son, sharing the view, equal in the moment, neither demanding nor diminishing. That vision filled me with peace. I knew Cassian's journey was only beginning, that therapy and self-reflection were fragile beginnings rather than permanent change. But I also knew the choice was no longer mine to make. I had set my boundaries, drawn my line, and he could step across only with respect. The sea breeze lifted the hair at my temples, carrying with it the scent of salt and lemon from the market below. I picked up my sketchpad again and drew 2 cups on a table, steam curling into the air, the harbor stretching wide behind them. It wasn't art anyone else would admire, but to me, it was a promise. Respect or nothing. As I shaded the horizon with my pencil, I realized I no longer feared what Cassian would do. His path was his. Mine was here, in this place of light, where I had chosen myself at last. And if our paths met again across that terrace table, it would be on ground I had defined, with no apologies, no erasures, no chains, just coffee, the horizon, and love rebuilt on respect. The day Elodie called about a new listing, my heart knew before my head had caught up. I had been renting a lovely flat overlooking the harbor, but some part of me remained unsettled, like a traveler with one foot still on the gangplank. I wanted roots again, not the kind that chained me to someone else's expectations, but roots I had chosen, planted in soil that belonged to me. "Madame Mirecourt," Elodie's voice sang through the line, "I believe I have found your place. Rooftop garden, panoramic sea view, belle, epoch charm, modernized enough for comfort but not stripped of character. Would you care to see it? I met her that same afternoon. The car curved through Monaco's narrow streets, climbing slightly until the sea fanned out like a great sheet of glass below us. The building stood tall and pale, its balconies draped with ironwork that curled like vines. When Elodie opened the door to the top-floor apartment, light rushed at me like an embrace. The rooms were airy, their walls kissed with the patina of time but refreshed with gentle colors. Tall windows opened to the sea, and at the far end, French doors led to a terrace that took my breath away. I stepped outside and saw it, a rooftop garden already planted with lavender, rosemary, and thyme, their scents mingling in the sun. Beyond, the Mediterranean stretched in every direction, yachts mere specks on its surface, the coastline a ribbon of green and gold. I stood there a long while, letting the sea air fill my lungs. I thought of the garden I had left behind, the roses now tended by the Fenwicks. That garden had been my tether to the past, but this terrace felt like a seedbed for the future. Inside, Elodie handed me the papers. The owner is ready for a swift sale. You could sign today if you wish. Her eyes twinkled. She already knew my answer. We sat at the polished table in the living room, the papers spread before me. As I lifted the pen, I felt the echo of that moment weeks earlier when I signed away my family home. Then, it had been liberation cutting myself free from chains. Now, as I pressed the nib to paper, it was not liberation but creation. Ink flowed, my name blooming in deliberate strokes across the deed. This time, there was no ambiguity, no legal caveat, no conditional estate. It was mine, the first true title in my own name, without Adrian's shadow or Cassian's entitlement. A permanent mark in the record of land and law, declaring, Serafina Miracourt lives here, by her own choice, on her own terms. When the final page was signed, Elodie clasped my hand. Felicitations. You are home. I walked the rooms again, no longer a visitor but an owner. In the kitchen, sunlight fell across the counter where I imagined kneading bread. In the bedroom, I opened the shutters and let the light pour in, already picturing mornings when I would rise to the sound of gulls. On the terrace, I knelt by the herb boxes, brushing my fingers across the fragrant sprigs. Later that evening, I planted a few more basil, sage, and mint purchased from a market stall on Rue Grimaldi. I pressed the soil around their roots with careful fingers, whispering, grow, as though speaking as much to myself as to them. That night, I dined alone on the terrace, a simple meal of bread, cheese, and tomatoes dressed with olive oil. I tore basil leaves straight from the plant I had just potted, their freshness sharp on my tongue. The horizon blazed with sunset, turning the sea copper and rose. For a moment, I closed my eyes and listened. The faint chatter of neighbors, the bell of a church tower, the hush of the tide against the rocks far below. No voices told me I was in the way. No one dismissed my choices as cluttered or outdated. Here my presence was not tolerated. It was enshrined. I thought of Cassian then, of his voice cracking when he admitted he was learning, changing. Perhaps one day he would sit across from me here, 2 cups of coffee steaming between us, no hierarchy, no expectation. But whether that day came or not, this home was mine. My identity no longer hinged on his approval, or on the house I had surrendered. The pen I had used lay on the table beside me, its ink still faintly smudged where my name curved across the deed. I picked it up, turning it between my fingers. Such a simple instrument, wood, metal, ink, yet it had reshaped the course of my life twice in a matter of months. The first time, it had severed me from the past. This time, it rooted me in the present, liberation and permanence, written in the same hand. As the sky deepened into twilight, I touched the soil of my new herbs once more, feeling the cool, damp earth. Their roots were just beginning to take hold, as mine were. And for the first time in decades, I felt certain. I was not passing through. I was planted, I was permanent, and I was finally home. Cassian arrived on a mild spring morning, the air soft with salt and the scent of wisteria spilling over the balcony railings. He had chosen to stay in a small hotel just down the street, an act that spoke volumes. There was no assumption that he would inhabit my space, no demand that I make room. He carried only a modest bag and a cautious smile when I met him outside the lobby. For the first time in years, I saw not entitlement in his eyes, but humility. "Mother," he said simply. "Cassian," I replied, and we embraced briefly, carefully, like two people beginning again. The next morning, we shared breakfast on my terrace. 2 cups of coffee sat between us, steam rising into the morning light. I had arranged plates of croissants, fruit, and cheese. He looked out at the horizon, the harbor dotted with sails, the sky stretching wide. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "I understand now why you left, why you chose this." I sipped my coffee before answering. "I didn't leave, Cassian. I arrived. There's a difference." He nodded, absorbing the words. We ate in companionable silence, no one asking for more than what was offered. It was not dependence. It was not hierarchy. It was 2 adults, mother and son, seated side by side, sharing the same view. That was enough. Later that week, another envelope arrived from the Fenwicks. Inside was a photograph of the garden, roses climbing thick along the trellis, their blooms fuller than I had ever seen them. Yisel's note was short but tender. "Your roses are still thriving. Every morning I think of you when I cut one for our table." I showed the picture to Cassian. He smiled faintly. "They look happy." "They are," I said, brushing my fingers over the image. "And so am I." For the first time, there was no pang of loss, only gratitude that what I had nurtured was flourishing in new hands. That evening, I hosted a gathering in my apartment, the terrace filled with the laughter of my new friends, Dr. Karen with her sharp wit, Elodie with her luminous smile, Henri and Celeste who brought a bottle of champagne, and Madame Dubois, who played a small accordion and coaxed us all into song. We ate bouillabaisse I had learned to make in class, drank wine that tasted of sunlight, and told stories until our voices grew hoarse. Cassian joined us, quieter than usual, listening more than speaking. He watched as I moved among my circle, laughing freely, pouring glasses, receiving affection not because of duty but because of choice. I saw him recognize it. This was a chosen family, a community built on respect. There was no obligation here, no resentment, only joy. As the sun lowered, casting the horizon in golden rose, I lifted my glass. The terrace quieted, all eyes on me. I looked first at Cassian, then at the faces around me, then out to the sea. My heart was full, not of bitterness or vindication, but of release. "To freedom," I said, voice steady. At last, glasses clinked, laughter spilled, and for a moment the horizon seemed to answer back, the sea itself raising a toast. I stood at the balcony rail as twilight deepened, the harbor lights beginning to flicker on, the air cooling against my skin. Cassian joined me, holding his cup of coffee instead of wine. We stood together without words, gazing at the same view. No net, no dependence, just respect, just presence. Behind us, the music and laughter carried on. Before us, the horizon stretched endless, a reminder that I had crossed into a life of my own making. And to those who might be listening, I say now what I wish I had heard years ago. If this story spoke to you, if you have ever felt erased or silenced, then subscribe because tomorrow, another story will flip another script. The sea whispered in reply, and I knew I had reached the ending I deserved.